Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. And at the risk of this early in the morning having you potentially doze off, I am going to ask you to close your eyes with me. So please close your eyes and imagine yourself. Imagine yourself at the age of 34. Now, this is an age where you still identify with being in your 20s, right? You're not willing to admit yet that you're in your mid-30s. You're relatively physically active. You still run the occasional 5K or 10K, and you're a mover and shaker at your Silicon Valley-based company. And you're about to take a ski vacation to Breckenridge, Colorado, and have promised yourself that you're not going to check your work email or take any work calls while you're on this vacation. I know that rarely happens, but really. And 7 days into this 10-day vacation, you come in for lunch after a morning of sled riding, and you start to feel an increasingly uncomfortable pressure in the center of your chest. And that's followed by a tingling sensation that begins to radiate down your left arm. That's really strange. Never felt anything like that before. What would you think? What would you do? Would you alert your family? Would you pray? You can go ahead and open your eyes. So here's what I did. I simply asked my husband, "Where's the aspirin?" Now, he knows that I don't take pills normally, and so he insisted that I tell him why I was asking for the aspirin. So I told him I described my symptoms, and I took the aspirin, and within a few minutes, my symptoms went away. So we went on about our day, and 2 days later, I woke up from sleep with the exact same symptoms. Did I alert my family? No, I went in the bathroom, I shut the door, and I sat on the edge of the bathtub, and I thought, I want to see if my strong, healthy body can resolve these symptoms without the aid of the aspirin. Well, my symptoms did not go away, and my husband thankfully called out to me from the bedroom, realizing that I hadn't come back to bed. And he insisted that we go to the emergency room. Now, I, of course, was like, no, this is our last day to go skiing before we fly back home to California. I'll take some aspirin, it'll be fine. Well, as we ate breakfast together as a family, now my parents, who are fully retired and live in Missouri, were there with us for the second half of the vacation. So we were eating breakfast, and we did a Bible reading together as a family. And throughout this time, my husband's continuing to insist that if I'm feeling chest pains, I need to go to the emergency room. Well, at the end of our Bible study, I heard that still small voice inside my head saying, "Becky, listen to your husband. Go to the emergency room." So finally I obliged, and off to the emergency room we went. Now, I was still hoping that this was just going to prove my husband wrong and that everything was going to be fine and we could still get a few ski runs in before the end of the day. Well, the ER doctor came in to give us the results of the test that they had run. He said there were some slight abnormalities, and it wasn't conclusive whether I'd had a heart attack, so they needed to send us down to Denver by ambulance for further testing that they couldn't do up in the mountains. My husband and I locked eyes at that point and both started to well up in tears. But we also wanted to be strong for the other person. My consistent physical health had long been a reliable component of our relationship, and the thought of losing that health shattered my vision of our future together. And in that room, my world stopped. Well, during the 2-hour ride down to Denver, I constantly worried what was my husband thinking and feeling. You see, he had to sit up in the front with the driver, and the EMTs were in the back with me. And I just wanted him in the back with me so that I could reassure him that everything was going to be fine. I mean, I'm an accountant. My life, my personal life, my work life are organized in spreadsheets, and for me, this did not add up. I was too healthy. It didn't make sense. I was in denial. In fact, I would say that I maintained the delusion that I was in control. Do you guys ever have that delusion too? In fact, that night in the hospital, they weren't able to schedule the test until the next day that I needed. We watched the mid-season finale of The Walking Dead, and I didn't even think that was ironic at the time. So the next day, I suffered a third and nearly fatal heart attack. during a routine cardiac catheterization test. All 3 of my main coronary arteries showed tears in the inner lining, a condition called spontaneous coronary artery dissection, or SCAD. And the doctor struggled to stabilize me, keeping me in a drug-induced coma. After multiple hours, they realized that they had done everything they could for me at that hospital, and I needed to be transferred across town to a different hospital with the technology and the expertise to save my life. And I've been told that when the staff came to the surgeon at that hospital and said, we're preparing an ambulance to take her from the west side of Denver to the east side of Denver, he said, she doesn't have time for an ambulance, get me a helicopter. So at that next hospital, doctors informed my family that my chances of survival were 20, maybe 30%, and that I would need a new heart if I were to live. This forecast felt like foreshadowing the final moments of my relatively younger life, and my husband begged the doctors to wake me up so he could say all the things that he wished he would have said to me before I went in for that final test. What we didn't know is there are a number of types of heart disease completely unrelated to the typical risk factors and the typical image of a heart attack victim. I woke up 4 days later, so I was in a coma. I woke up 4 days later to the news that I would need a heart transplant. And this, for me was, again, just completely, I'm waking up after 4 days in a coma, I'm in a different hospital, and I need a heart transplant. Like, this just doesn't make sense, right? Well, I was also intubated at the time, and I couldn't speak, so my only mode of communication was through writing. And I kept writing to my husband, call Nick, call Nick. You see, I thought that the best way to get the best heart the fastest was with a lot of money. I thought it was going to cost a lot of money. And what I was meaning by call Nick was call Nick Woodman, who's the CEO of GoPro, where my husband works, because I was certain that even though I'd never met him, he would loan us whatever amount of money we needed to get that heart. By the way, I don't think he even knows this story, but thankfully organ transplantation does not work that way. Well, one night while still in the hospital waiting for news of a new heart, I had a very clear dream. And I was anxious to tell my family about this dream because I was concerned that they would think maybe I had been hallucinating. But in this dream, Jesus told me that he was going to deliver the right heart for me, but it was going to be 2 months. It was going to be a 2-month wait. And I pleaded with him and I said, God, I don't think I can physically make it 2 more months. And especially, I don't know if my family can emotionally handle waiting every day in the hospital for 2 months, wondering if that's going to be the day that I'm going to get my new heart. But he reassured me that everything was going to be okay and we needed to prepare for a 2-month wait. So the next morning, I stepped out in faith and I told my family that we needed to prepare for this 2-month wait. But I also know the power of prayer. And so my husband and I put out a plea on social media to our friends and family to increase the fervor with which they were praying to deliver a new heart sooner. And the very next day, after 2 weeks in the hospital with no heartbeat, I'll explain that in a minute, a cardiologist came into my room at an unusual time and with a glow on his face, and I said, "Do we have a heart?" And he said, "Yes, we have a heart." And I wanted to shout from the top of those Rocky Mountains that God had answered our prayers. There was still a future for me here, for us here. So this no heartbeat thing, right? 2 weeks is a relatively short time to actually wait, to be on the waiting list. Many organ transplant recipients wait a period of months, but I didn't have months. I was on an external machine called a biventricle assist device that was functioning as my heart. So my blood would go out of my carotid artery into this machine that would oxygenate and warm my blood and then circulate it back through my body. And doctors had originally told my family and I that I could be on this machine for a period of weeks. Well, as we transitioned into the second week, waiting for news of this new heart, They did cite one example where someone had been on the machine for a couple of months. Not the most comforting thing while you're, sitting there waiting, right? The elation that we had felt originally when getting news of this new heart was quickly tempered by the nurses informing us that we shouldn't tell our family and friends yet because a doctor from my hospital had to physically go to the hospital where my heart was, or at least I called it my heart already, right? Where my heart was waiting, which was in Kansas City, before they could, determine if all was a go. So we waited all night to find out when that was going to happen, and it didn't end up happening until the next morning. And around midday, they ended up taking me back to prep me for the surgery. And if you're wondering what I was thinking in that moment, actually what I was apparently doing, I was making this motion when the doctors were asking me, like, are you ready? Because I was like, yeah, let's get this show on the road. I've been waiting all night. I've been waiting 2 weeks for this. And while I don't remember this, when I came to after the surgery, apparently I kept saying to everyone, I got a new heart. And my anesthesiologist, I told him, I got a new heart. And he said, I know, I was there. My soul was truly joyful in that moment. I mean, you see videos of people on Facebook, right? And they come to from a surgery, maybe after having their wisdom teeth taken out or something, and they're saying all these silly things that you think, I would have never thought that person would say that. So I'm happy that when I came to for my surgery, I was just truly joyful of that. I will never know if the outcome would have been different had I sought immediate medical attention, but delaying treatment likely sealed the fate of my original heart. And I am truly blessed beyond measure to have my life given back in full by my heart donor. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my husband, Jeremiah, who's here with us in the audience today, for getting me to that emergency room and for your enduring love and support. Let's give him a round of applause. A little bit about my background. I grew up in a small town in Missouri, or as the locals say, Missouri. It's the same community where my parents grew up and their parents before them. And it literally took an act of God for us to miss church on a Sunday like an ice storm. I grew up enjoying competing with my brother, who's 2 years older than me, hoping to best his academic and athletic achievements. Which, by the way, I think that was just a one-sided competition. I don't think that he thought we were in competition. And I graduated high school valedictorian with 3 state championships under my belt in track. And off to the big state school, Mizzou, I went to run cross country and track and to major in business. I consider myself very fortunate that when I got to college, I had an immediate track family that was largely comprised of fellow Christians. Because I've often wondered if that hadn't been the case, would I have strayed further from my faith during that impressionable time? On the other hand, I also consider it a blessing that one of my best friends coming out of college, and he remains one of my best friends today, is an atheist. It's because of him that I know that my relationship with Jesus is something that I've chosen and cultivated, and not just something that was passed down from family tradition. So after college, I moved out to Colorado in search of adventure, and after having lived there for 4 years, I thought I met the man who was the one, and not Jeremiah, by the way. In fact, in order to prove my commitment to him, I pulled my application halfway through the recruitment process to become a special agent for the FBI, because he was a Colorado guy, and the FBI won't place you in the city where you've applied, and he wasn't willing to move. And so I chose him over this career path. Well, shortly thereafter, he broke up with me and shattered my heart. And I fell into a deep depression. I lost a significant amount of weight in a very short period of time. Picture me about 15 pounds lighter than I am right now. And I was very angry with God. I was very confused about how could I feel so strongly for someone that was apparently so wrong for me? And what did it take to earn someone's love and to keep someone's love? And I felt even more willing to cross lines that I had never been willing to cross before. And then one day, several months during this dark period, I realized I don't have to feel this way anymore. Initially I didn't possess the power over this darkness that had gripped me. But there came a time when I realized I do have a choice. God had healed my wounds at that point. Now, trust me, there were plenty of days where I still chose to play the victim, but increasingly I chose the positive. Well, not long thereafter, God sent Jeremiah into my life to save me from my darkness then. And at the time, little did I know that he would literally save me 7 years later to get me to that emergency room. And that's why one of the first things that I wrote to Jeremiah when I came out of that coma was that you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, it's been 2 years and 9 months since my transplant. And I consider it a true miracle that God allowed this to happen when we were in Colorado with my family, where we have a solid support network of other family and friends. And that was also where I would get my new, younger heart. And over time, the memories of the pain and the suffering that I endured during those 33 total days in the hospital and the recovery thereafter, that dulls over time. But one memory brightens, and that's how close I felt to God. My confidence in his power and his grace during that time were at an all-time high. I knew my life was in his hands, and for me, that was enough. And people have often asked me, how did I stay so positive during this? And to be honest, I don't feel like I did anything special, because when God strips away everything that you have and everything that you can physically do, he leaves you no choice but to rely on him and acknowledge that he's the one that's in control. In today's world, I stress over the everyday decisions of what am I going to make for dinner and how there's just not enough time and energy to exercise consistently. As daily life has returned to normalcy, working a more than full-time job and remodeling our recently purchased home, these types of things distract me from my relationship with Jesus. And I wonder, am I capable of drawing that close to God in the absence of such tragedy? I struggle with that every single day. I want to feel that closeness to God. I desire that. But all these daily things, when life is just humming along, they distract me from my relationship with Jesus. For me, it's easier to remember to call on him in the big things or the really hard things, but not in the everyday things. I fantasize ways that I could strip myself of the responsibilities of this fast-paced life in Silicon Valley to draw into a closer relationship with Jesus. I dream of selling everything, moving to a cabin in the mountains surrounded by beauty and serenity. But two things bring me back to reality. One, PayPal has really great health insurance. And two, God saved me for a purpose. And that purpose is not to become a hermit. That purpose, not unlike what it was before, is to share God's love and peace with others. And I also have a newfound passion advocating for women's heart health and for organ donation. So how do we share God's love and peace in Silicon Valley? Well, I once had a consultant on my project say to me when she learned that I was from Missouri, I knew there was something different about you. You could take that in different ways, but what she meant in the context of that conversation is that she knew and had experienced that I was relatively patient, kind, and respectful of others. And so if people know that you're a Christian, maybe it's by the jewelry that you wear as an example, and they see the peace with which you carry and conduct yourself, that's an opening for God to work in their hearts. As I like to say, be a servant leader, not the loudest leader. So why concern yourself with finding peace through Jesus specifically? Well, this peace really dictates the quality of life that we experience in this world. We're inundated with this concept of how to find our happy or how to define our own happy ending. But happiness implies an element of justice and fairness. It's not fair that I have to take medications for the rest of my life, the side effects of which will likely be the eventual cause of my death. It's not fair that at the age of 34, I nearly lost my life to a series of heart attacks when I've never taken even one puff of a cigarette. It's not fair that a 13-year-old girl would lose her life when I, who had already traveled and experienced the world, would live. But life's not fair because we live in a sin-broken world. And this is where the Jesus part comes in. Jesus is the antidote to that sin. We know that Jesus will always be there with us. You all know the bumper sticker, right? Shit happens. I say, really bad shit happens. But God will always be there. Jesus will be there with us in those times, and he will lift us above it and carry us through it. And so think of the things that we accomplish when we're at peace with God. Peace in knowing that he has it. We free ourselves of this quest for happiness, fairness, justice, and control. And we allow ourselves to take risks, to fail, learn, and try again. So I want to share some things with you that guide me every day in attempting to recapture this reliance on God. And one of the first things that I've kind of implemented in my life post-heart transplant is a garbage in, garbage out concept. I used to, during my commute to and from work, listen to hip-hop and rap music. Now I almost exclusively listen to Christian music. Also, many of the books that I read are now biblically based or written by Christian authors. And a couple books that I wanted to bring to your attention. The first is a book called Simplify. That's Simplify with a Y on the end by Bill Hybels. And two things that I've implemented from that book. The first is scheduling in daily chair time with God. And that can look different for different people, right? That could be reading from your Bible, it could be reading a devotion, it could be prayer, or just simply listening. God, what are you telling me right now? For me, what that looks like, my husband and I don't have kids, so mornings are actually a relatively quieter time around the house. And so when I sit down to breakfast, I read a devotion from the YouVersion Bible app on my phone, and I pray about what's going on in my life and those around me. The second thing that I took away from that book is having a life verse. And think of that as like your mantra to live by. And that verse can change over time. For me, that verse is from 1 Peter 3:15. And that is, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks the reason for the hope that you have. Well, the reason for the hope that I had when I was laying in that hospital bed, wondering every day when I was going to get a new heart, and the reason for the hope that I have today is knowing that God is in control. Thank God that he is in control and that I'm not, because I would mess it up. And also that one day I will be in heaven with him, where there is no more pain and there is no more suffering. And it's not because of anything that I've done, but because Jesus was the substitute for my sins by God's grace. Well, another book that I've read that I wanted to share with you is called No More Faking Fine. No More Faking Fine by Esther Fleece. And it's about the concept of lamentation. Not a word that we hear very often in this day and age, but it's about lamenting your anger to God. And not just that it's okay to do that, but that it's more than okay. In fact, this is where God is calling us to walk closer with him. And in fact, that's a sign, of us relying on God and recognizing and acknowledging that he's in control when we do cry out to him in anger. Well, I want to thank you for allowing me to share my story with you today. And what I've come to realize over time is that this isn't just my story. It's our story. It's the story of everyone who's been touched by the events that happened in November and December 2014. It's the story of the family who lost their 13-year-old daughter, whose heart I now carry inside me. It's the story of everyone who prayed for us. It's the story of those who've gone back to church because of it. It's the story of those who now tell their family and their loved ones more frequently how they really feel about them because they know that tomorrow is not a promise. What is a promise is God's grace and glory. When he allowed this to happen to me, it was in the presence of my closest family and friends. He spoke to me directly to assure me that everything was going to be fine and he would provide. And he answered our prayers and delivered a heart sooner. I am truly blessed through this experience to have felt the abiding presence of God. And you too can experience that peace by implementing things that are reminders to you every day to place your reliance on God. In preparing for this speech, I came across what is now one of my favorite quotes, and it's from the author Sheila Walsh. And this is, "Peace is not the absence of trouble," and I'll say that again, "Peace is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of Christ." You know, it doesn't make sense that I was at peace with God when I was laying in that hospital bed in pain and suffering and wondering every day. But God does love us, and he wants us to have a closer relationship with him. And so I would implore you, please don't wait for a big tragedy to happen in your life to seek that closer relationship with him. And so I'll close with a verse from Philippians 4, verse 7. "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Thank you.